Electric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast. The songs and stories of a music icon.
Hello and welcome to Electric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast. I'm Tom, and today I wanted to dive into one of those Gary Numan songs that has had quite a unique life. Personally, this is a song that I ended up listening to loads and loving when it was re-released in remix form nearly 10 years after its initial version, and I'd argue that both versions are very different songs, but both excellent in their own way. So today we are looking at Bleed from Gary's 1994 album Sacrifice. So looking back, Bleed and the album it came from is incredibly important in Gary's story, not necessarily because it was a huge moment commercially, but because it feels like such a clear example of Gary finding his way back to himself after a really difficult period. Bleed is creepy, anxious, dark, strangely beautiful, and depending on which version you listen to, you can either feel like someone lying awake at night trying not to panic, or like the panic has burst through the wall and is now screaming in your face. So in this episode, I want to look at the song itself, what it might be about, how it fits into Sacrifice, and what was going on with Gary at the time, the later hybrid remix, the live history of the song, and why I think Bleed is one of the key tracks in the birth of modern Gary Numan. And as ever with Gary, there's a lot more going on than first meets the eye. So by 1994, Gary was in a very different place to the Gary Numan of 79 and 80. By the late 80s and early 90s, things had become much harder. The hits had dried up, the press had not exactly been kind to him, and creatively he seemed to be searching for something that would really make sense again. There had been some really interesting songs in that period, and I'll always defend parts of the late 80s catalogue because I think there's more going on there than people might sometimes give him credit for. But even Gary himself has talked quite openly over the years about losing his way a bit and doing things for the wrong reasons, or trying to fit into a version of the music industry that didn't really suit him. And then came Sacrifice. And the thing I find fascinating about Sacrifice is that it wasn't made from a position of confidence. It wasn't Gary saying, right, here comes my big comeback album, everybody get ready. It was almost the opposite. He has said that when he made Sacrifice, he didn't have a record contract and wasn't even sure he would ever get one again. He's talked about having huge debts and feeling like his career might basically be finished. So in his own mind, Sacrifice was almost like a hobby album, something he was making because he wanted to, not because he thought it was going to save everything. And weirdly, I think that's exactly why it works. Because instead of chasing something, Gary seems to stop and ask himself what he actually wants to make and what kind of music does he want to hear, what kind of world does he want to create. That's why Sacrifice feels so different to what came immediately before it. It's darker, it's colder and more personal, and it has this very clear atmosphere running through it. Religion, fear, guilt, death, panic, obsession, nightmares, it's all in there. And Gary has described that period as him finding his real direction again.
With Sacrifice, I abandoned all thoughts of future chart success. I simply made making music a hobby again. I had no idea if the album would even be released, but it felt good. It felt as though a huge weight had lifted off my shoulders, a weight that had crushed my creativity. Ideas began to flow faster than ever. I discovered I had things I wanted to write about beyond the one-dimensional career grumblings of the last few albums. It looks at many things, mostly disturbing, that had affected my life in the years leading up to that point. Frightening dreams, the feeling of things waiting for you, of being alone. It was darker and heavier than anything I'd done before. Even the sleeve was black. For the first time in a very long time, I felt that I really knew what I was doing. I thought back to my machine analogy, where all the pieces needed to be turning smoothly together for the machine to work properly. With Sacrifice, it felt as if they were doing exactly that.
Another important part of the Sacrifice story is Depeche Mode. Gary has talked about songs of faith and devotion being a big influence on him at that point, and that makes complete sense when you hear Sacrifice. Not because Sacrifice sounds like a copy of Depeche Mode, because I don't think it does, but because there's a similar sense of darkness, spirituality, and emotional weight. Songs of faith and devotion had shown how electronic music could become heavier and more tortured and physical, and more religious in tone without losing its identity. It wasn't bright synth pop, and it was dirty, intense, and full of conflict. And for Gary, that seemed to help unlock something.
In fact, hearing their Songs of Faith and Devotion album had been a pivotal moment for me when I was getting Sacrifice underway in 1994. The sound of that album, the dark atmosphere that poured out of it, was all very much to do with Alan Wilder, and so, in many respects, he had unknowingly been a huge inspiration for how I'd reinvented myself. Not only that, I thought his work with Recoil post-Depeche Mode was exceptional, so his influence on me was ongoing.
You stumbled in my footsteps. Keep the same appointments I kept. If you try walking in my shoes. If you try walking in my shoes.
He's talked about Depeche Mode giving him kind of a blueprint, and I think you can hear that most clearly in the mood of Sacrifice. And that's why Bleed fits so perfectly on it, because Bleed could be seen as a panic attack turned into a song. The song opens with one of those lines that immediately puts you in the wrong place mentally. Someone is talking, but it's not conversation.
Someone is talking, but it's not conversation. Sounds more like a voice in my head. It says, I live in nightmares, I'm the new god of panic, and I'm waiting for you to come home to me.
It's such a simple way to start, but it's really effective. Straight away you know this isn't a normal situation, and then Gary says it sounds more like a voice in his head. I don't personally hear Bleed as a literal ghost story, even though there is a line about ghost stories later on. I hear it more about a song of anxiety or intrusive thoughts, night terrors, or that horrible feeling when your own mind starts to feel like something separate from you. The voice then says, I live in nightmares, I'm the new god of panic. That line is brilliant because it's so Gary Numan, especially for this period. He doesn't just say I'm scared or I'm anxious, he turns panic into a character, and not just a character, but a god. And that's a really powerful idea, because if panic becomes a god, then panic is now something you obey. It's bigger than you and it rules the room. It decides what happens next. And that fits so well with the religious imagery across Sacrifice. The album is full of that sort of language. Faith, gods, sin, all these big spiritual ideas, but Gary twists them into something much more personal and uncomfortable. So instead of God being the thing that saves you, the god in Bleed is panic, and it's waiting for you to come home. And that's quite the creepy image. The idea that fear is sitting there patiently waiting like it knows you'll be back eventually. Then we get to the chorus. Boy, welcome to sleep, I'm gonna make you bleed.
So boy, welcome to sleep. I'm gonna make you bleed. Boy, welcome to sleep. I'm gonna make you bleed.
What I love about that is how wrong it makes sleep feel. Usually sleep is where you go to escape or rest. It's where the day stops bothering you for a while, but in Bleed, sleep is the trap. Sleep is where the danger lives. And then later in the song, Gary changes from being addressed by the voice to almost begging against it, saying, don't let me sleep. And later, I don't want to sleep. That progression is really important. At the start, the voice is in control. It's saying, welcome to sleep, I'm going to hurt you. But as the song goes on, the narrator becomes more aware of the pattern. He knows what's coming. He knows that sleep is going to take him somewhere frightening, and now he's trying to resist it. And that's why I think the song works so well as a description of anxiety at night. There's something very specific about fear in the middle of the night. During the day, you can distract yourself. You can put the radio on, speak to people, work or walk around, make a cup of tea, listen to some Numan, obviously. But at night, especially when you're alone, everything feels louder and every thought gets bigger. So every worry seems more dramatic. And the moment you try to sleep, your brain can suddenly turn into the worst possible cinema, and it's a bit of a dick. Bleed captures that feeling incredibly well. It's not horror in the sense of a monster jumping out at you, it's horror in the sense of lying in bed and realising the monster is in your own head. And there's another line in the song that I think it opens it up even more. My mother told me don't believe in ghost stories. That's a really interesting moment because suddenly the song becomes about childhood. Until then it could be a purely adult experience, but that line makes it feel older and it suggests that his fear has a history. A mother tells a child not to believe in ghost stories, there's nothing to hurt you in here, don't be silly, don't be scared, get back to sleep. But then comes a response, but she was wrong. And I think that's one of the saddest parts of the song because it's not necessarily saying that ghosts are real, it could be saying that fear is real and trauma and anxiety is real. The thing that haunts us are real, even if they don't have a physical body. And that's why the ghost story idea works so well. As children, we might be afraid of ghosts or monsters, shadows. As adults, we might not believe in those things anymore, but we still get haunted, and it's just the haunting becomes more internal. And that's why for me Bleed feels much more emotional than it might seem at first. It has that gothic nightmare imagery, but underneath there's a very human feeling, and it's about being frightened of your own mind. And musically, the original version of Bleed is quite restrained, and that's one of the reasons it's so effective. It doesn't come charging out like an industrial rock song, it doesn't try to batter you into submission, it's much more unsettling than that. And the chorus is even quite catchy. Sacrifice is not a busy album in the way some of Gary's earlier records could be. It has a lot of space and mood. Everything is deliberate and it's not trying to impress you with big hooks every few seconds. It's trying to pull you into his world, and that's why I think Sacrifice was such an important turning point. We followed the line from Sacrifice to Exile, then Pure, then Jagged, Splinter, Savage, Intruder. You can hear the beginning of that later Gary Numan sound forming here. It's not fully there yet, the sounds are quite repetitive and simple at times, and then Pure would make it much heavier, and Splinter would make it more cinematic, and then Savage would make it more widescreen and huge, but that initial DNA is in Sacrifice. And one thing I always find interesting about Gary's career is that fans now often talk about Sacrifice as this obvious turning point, but at the time it wasn't some huge commercial comeback. It's easy to look back now and say, of course this was the start of the modern era, but in '94 Gary was still working his way out of a long difficult period. He didn't suddenly become a mainstream critical darling again overnight, and that came later bit by bit. But Sacrifice mattered because it gave him a direction, and it proved that there was a way forward. It didn't involve him trying to recreate the early hits or fit into whatever the current pop landscape wanted from him. And it also makes Bleed feel even more personal. Even if the lyrics aren't literally autobiographical, the mood of the song makes sense in that context. It's a man writing from a place of uncertainty and fear, but also rediscovery. It's not a comfortable album, but it's a very honest one. Then, nearly 10 years later, Bleed was given a very different second life on Hybrid. The Hybrid album came out in 2003 and it's a really interesting project because it isn't just a simple remix album in the usual sense. More like Gary's catalogue being pulled through the darker, heavier industrial sound that he'd moved into by that point. By then Pure had already happened, and Gary's music had already become much more aggressive, the guitars were heavier and the programming was harder, and the whole thing had a much more industrial feel. So when Bleed turns up on Hybrid and it was reworked by Sulphur, it feels like the same song seen from a completely different lens. So the original version is about being lonely and frightened, but the Hybrid version is rather violent and physical, and I mean that in a good way. Suddenly the threat in the song doesn't feel like it's just in somebody's head, it feels like it's actually in the room. Sulphur were a perfect choice for that because Rob Holiday and Monty had that whole industrial rock thing nailed by then. Their version of Bleed brings in much more force, more guitar, more weight, and those harsh vocal layers that completely change the atmosphere. Rob Holiday had been a touring member of The Prodigy since 2005, is credited with additional vocals on the track, and I think it's very likely that he's the one doing those screamo parts, and they sound very much in his world, and they turn the song into something much more confrontational. On the Sacrifice version, the new God of Panic is suggested, but on the Hybrid version, you actually hear it, and that's the big difference. like about the hybrid version is that it doesn't replace the original, it doesn't make the original redundant, it just gives you another angle of that same fear. The original Bleed is what panic feels like when you're alone at 3 a.m, and the hybrid version is what panic feels like when it's taken over completely. And that's why I think it's one of the more successful reworks in hybrid, because it doesn't just put a beat under an old song, it changes the way you experience the lyrics. The hybrid version actually removes big portions of the song, including the original's chorus, but I reckon that makes sense in the context of the update's overall sound. In terms of live performances, Bleed is an interesting one because it's not a permanent fixture. It has had a decent life on stage though. According to setlist.fm, it has been performed 69 times, which is actually quite a healthy number for a non-single from Sacrifice. It's not one of those deep cuts that appeared once or twice and then disappeared forever. It's clearly meant enough to Gary or worked well enough live to keep coming back at different points. And I can see why, in a live setting, especially with Gary's later band arrangements, Bleed has the potential to become much heavier than the original studio version. And that's one of the interesting things about the Sacrifice material in general. Some of it almost feels like it was waiting for Gary's later live sound to catch up with it. And Gary's also transformed it into an acoustic version, which gave it a whole new, quieter take. He first performed it acoustically online for fans. I believe it was during the 2020 lockdown. I might be wrong on that.
So boys, welcome to sleep. I'm gonna make you bleed. Boy, welcome to sleep. I'm gonna make you bleed. I could be dreaming, but maybe let's fade out. There's nowhere to hide in your dreams. I'm so uneasy, I'm shaking and nervous. I'm alone in my room and I'm scared of it.
But then he also included it on his acoustic tour in 2023. This clip is taken from the Hackney Church show, which I attended at the time.
Somebody's talking, but it's not conversation. Sounds more like a voice in my head. It says, I live in nightmares, you got a panic. I'm waiting for you to come home to me.
There's also a wider connection with the way Gary writes about fear with this song. If you look across his catalogue, fear is everywhere, but it changes shape depending on the era. In the early two-way army and replicas period, fear is often futuristic, technology, surveillance, machines, all those sort of things. In the telecon era, it becomes more personal and emotional. In the mid-80s, it sometimes gets buried under different production styles, but the themes are still there if you look for them. And in Sacrifice, the fear becomes spiritual and psychological. By Exile, it's almost theological. By Pure, the fear becomes more aggressive and self-destructive. By Splinter, it's tied to depression, grief, and emotional collapse. And by Savage and Intruder, the fear becomes environmental, global, almost apocalyptic. So Bleed sits at a really important point in that journey. It's where the fear turns inward in a much darker and more focused way. So it's not about robots or fame. It's a song about lying in your room, being scared of what happens when you close your eyes, and in some ways, that's more frightening than any science fiction idea. So where does Bleed sit in Gary's catalogue? Well, for me, it's not necessarily one of the big public-facing songs. It's not something you would play to a total newcomer. But if someone already had an interest in Gary and wanted to understand how he got from the classic early synth sound to the darker modern albums, I think Bleed would be one of the songs I'd point them towards. It tells you about the darkness that would become central to his later work. And with the hybrid version, it also shows how flexible the song can be. It can exist as a quiet nightmare or as an industrial attack, and somehow both versions feel true to it, and that's not easy to pull off. So looking at your comments about Bleed, Peter Keogh said, working in Tower Hill, London, got the tape that afternoon. Just remember hearing Bleed for the first time standing on the platform, waiting for the train up to Putney Bridge, thinking he's back. Robert Fraser said, a standout track on the original album, even better on hybrid, anthemic sins and great vocal, great live too. Stephen Paul Davis said, Bleed was a welcome back to basics approach and the whole album was welcome despite the CD's mastering and audio equipment setup all wrong, but the song's quality shone through. Still better than his recent material. This LP is as pure Numan as you can get. Andrew Doherty said, Bleed for me is one of my top 3 tracks. It's definitely one I listen to a lot and the hybrid version is brilliant. Although Splinter, Savage and Intruder are great, I think Bleed beats every track on those albums. Darren Gwilt said, a fantastic song from what is now one of his most iconic albums, probably due to it being regarded not only by fans but by Gary himself as the album that saved his career. It was brilliantly re-recorded for the hybrid album, but it was Bleed performed live in September 2003 that lives long in my memory. An absolute showstopper, and it perfectly showed not only who Gary Numan was, but who Gary Numan was going to be in the years to come. Thank you, I look forward to your podcast. Keep up the good work. I'll keep meaning to drop you an email with one of my many humorous stories, but then I wonder if anyone would find them interesting. Maybe I will anyway, one day if I can find the courage. Please do, Darren, and I will read it out. Tina Jefferson said, Bleed is brilliant and the live version he did in Brighton for the warm-up for Sonic Sphere was amazing. Wish he would do that version again. Gwyn Butler said, this is another level of Gary's fantastic ability to write and sing his songs in true style and be up to date is remarkable. Followed him since Cars, once a Numan fan, always a Numan fan. And to show the difference of opinion, Gordon Ward said, great on Sacrifice, shite on Hybrid. So there you go. Carl Sherlock said, honestly, I thought Bleed and Scar were the most authentically Numan tracks on the album and would have made better singles than Question of Faith and Magic. Just my opinion though, Seed of a Lie is also excellent and was in fact a promotional single. I also had a great email from Chris Anderson. I saw your post about Bleed and it stopped me cold. I've been a fan of Gary Numan since hearing Our Friends Electric in a local record shop in late 1979. Even during the leaner years, Metal Rhythm, Machine and Soul, his work held me. Sacrifice arrived at a moment when my life was changing completely. But in 1994, I entered the State Police Academy. It was relentless. Every day felt like the opening minutes of Full Metal Jacket. Everything familiar was stripped away, including music. When Sacrifice was released, I copied it into a cassette and smuggled it into the barracks, hiding it in an air vent. At night, using my issued Sony tape recorder, I listened under my pillow. I always returned to Bleed. I didn't analyse it, I just listened to the opening percussion, the restraint, the words. It carried me through long, sleepless nights as I prepared for a life that would soon include fatal crashes and real blood. Looking back, I understand why it stayed with me. Bleed doesn't offer comfort or resolution, it simply acknowledges some sort of damage. In that recognition, it mirrored the life I was stepping into, and that was enough. That was from Chris in Kentucky, so thanks so much for that email, Chris. And please also send in your own Numanoid stories like that, or anything you'd like to say at all. Just reach out over email on newmanpodcast@gmail.com or on all the socials at Numan Podcast, or head to newmanpodcast.com for more. And remember, if you'd like to support me on the show, you can get your hands on some Electric Friends merch, so t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, mugs, all that kind of thing. Head to the show notes of this episode for where to get them, or head to electric-friends.printify.me. That's it though for now. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next time with another episode. So have a good one, take care, and speak soon.
My mother told me don't believe in ghost stories. There's nothing to hurt you in here. But she was wrong and now it's come back to haunt me. It says it won't leave me alive for long. I don't want to sleep. It's gonna make me late. I don't want to sleep. It's gonna make me bleed. I sleep. It's gonna make me bleed. I don't want to sleep. It's gonna make me bleed.
Electric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast. The songs and stories of a music icon.